Hey folks, welcome along. Nice to see more people online again on this springtime, I guess, for most people watching, I guess, unless you're down the other side of the world. We've got two more great speakers for you guys tonight. We've got Daniel Paulus is joining us again. He's going to talk a little bit about integrating Azure Kubernetes Service and Azure OpenAI. And then later we've got Tim Warner, who's coming back again as well. And Tim's going to talk about mastering Azure Private Link, secure and private access to your services. So Nick, want to say hi to the guys?
So let's just, before we get started, we do some housekeeping.
Yep, no problem.
Yeah, so me, myself, so I'm Nicholas Chang, I'm an MVP, and I'm a senior platform engineer at AKS.
And I'm Kevin Green, I'm Microsoft MVP and an Azure practice lead in Ergo in Dublin.
Yeah, so I just want to highlight two of the most popular events that's happening in Microsoft, the AI Skill Fest and Agent Hackathon. So the AI Skill Fest is from the Microsoft Learn team. It's like a challenge to go to Guinness World Record. So join that in the first link, and the second link is AI Agent Hackathon for everyone to learn agents itself. Would you like to do this one?
Yeah, I'll do the code of conduct. So, folks, as usual, all members of the group should adhere to this code of conduct. So please be friendly and welcoming to everyone. Please be patient. Not everybody is as technical as the next person. Be thoughtful, respectful, and inclusive, and also be open and curious. So ask questions to understand and not criticize. If you ask questions, Nick and myself are going to be on the sideline having a look at your questions, trying to answer them ourselves. We'll make sure that the speakers then get the question that you need, and hopefully we get you the answers during the session. So
yeah. So like Kevin mentioned, it's going to be, this session event's going to be based on AKS and Private Link. So Dan is doing this a session integration AKS with Azure OpenAI in intelligent apps, while Tim Rory is doing one on mastering Private Link. So the next event, sorry, I kind of did a typo on this. This is meant to be 8th to 9th of May. It's Global Azure. So I'm hosting one in maybe Microsoft Reactor. So stay tuned for that. And after the next following one will be June. So let's bring out our first speaker.
Hey, Daniel.
Daniel.
Hey, good evening. Good evening.
Welcome back.
Thank you. Always great to be back.
Ready for more?
Yeah, let's start it. So as the guy said, it's late for me. So give me a bit of slack if something goes wrong. But let's kick it off and see if we can tell some nice things about AI and AKS.
Daniel, just as usual, I'm going to ask you the question. If there's comments or queries from the audience, do you want us to just hold them till the end for you, or do you want us to just flash them up on the screen for you? It's up to you.
So I can see the screen when I'm presenting, but when I switch over to the demo, let's build in a few moments to answer some questions. So the first part will be slides, and the second part will be live on demo. And in the demo, feel free to ask questions at any time.
Awesome. We'll keep them ready for you. Thanks,
All
Daniel.
right. Thank you. So let's kick it off then. Let me see if my clicker works. So yeah, hey folks. My name is Daniel Paulus. I'm the head of Azure Solutions for The Factory, a small company in the Netherlands. We specialize in anything with Microsoft Azure, but also have a few folks that run AWS solutions. I am a Azure MVP, just like the guys, and it's always a pleasure to talking with people in real life or like this remote. So what are we going to cover today? We're going to talk about what are intelligent apps, because I think there are a few things going around the internet these days, and I want to set the stage so we talk about the same thing. So how do we do that? And how do we then use AKS to make our lives easier We zoom in on AI with AKS, do some takeaways, and then a Q&A. In between the takeaways and the Q&A, let's do the demo. So yeah, what are intelligent applications? So by now you all know that this is the new era of computing. AI is everywhere. It's buzzing everywhere. All kinds of new models everywhere. Things are moving fast, really, really fast. I'm also going to tell you, I'm not a data engineer. I do not build any type of models at all. I just consume what's out there and have an interest in AI. And with that, I'm trying to, make apps more intelligent nowadays. So, like I said, AI is everywhere. And for me, it all started when GitHub released Copilot. But then the big news came from Microsoft and OpenAI, and we saw things spinning around like crazy, right? There were chatbots everywhere. With the security Copilot, our lives get really better when it comes to dealing with security fatigue. And of course, everywhere is Copilot, everywhere. That also makes that we need to consider certain things when we work with AI. I really like the 6 core principles of responsible AI that is pushed by Microsoft. So when we build new applications, chatbots, new integrations, we need to think about the privacy and the security. And that is why I really like Microsoft OpenAI instead of all the other like APIs that we have, because there we know for sure that it stays inside of the boundaries of our Azure subscription. So in our demo tonight, you will see me using Azure OpenAI instead of OpenAI itself. We have to think about how are we using this in a sense to inclusiveness, right? If you look at the new models that are out there, like Whisper, which can take voice and put it into text, why do we need to type? If we can speak, right? So think about how we can adopt things to make it more inclusive. Accountability, transparency, show how AI is doing things, make sure that in the back end of the application, we can always trace what answers have been given to people that use our website. Same comes for fairness, right? How do we make sure that we give the same answer to the same question? And is there still human involvement in all of this? Then think about reliability and safety. It has to work, but it also has to work on a way that we know is safe and we can always trust the system. These are things to keep in mind when building a new AI integration anytime, but I always like to give them when I do this presentation. There are many ways we can use AI or build AI into our system, but I always would say use SDKs because they make sure that we use the APIs and the possibilities in a consistent manner. And when you start to work with this, think about how do we scale, because we have seen in the recent days when OpenAI made their new image tool ready for the world, they were hammered, right? So always think about, if this is going to run, how do I scale the system? And this is also a nice bridge to AKS because we can scale with AKS. What I'm going to show you today is a legacy application that we want to enhance with AI capabilities. So we're going to bolt on AI technology to a legacy app. What we're going to do is we're going to make a chatbot and put it behind a feature flag when we deploy this application into AKS. We want to make sure that we can look at how it is working, how the performance is going. We want to scale the app, and we want to automate everything with CI/CD. As you can see, there's quite a lot. So the demo this evening will not be everything, but I have a blog post that's coming up, and you can find me showing these kind of things on other platforms as well. We're gonna do this by using a service mesh. And you might say, but why a service mesh? You might have seen talks from me in the past where I said, let's not use a service mesh. Well, for this, we are going to use a service mesh. And we're going to use a service mesh as it brings us a lot of opportunities in this case. It brings us service discovery. We have an application, the legacy application. We have an application, the AI chatbot, and we want to connect those two together. But I also want to make sure that I can deploy a secondary application for the legacy one where we have bolted on this AI capability. So we need to make sure that I can do traffic management. And of course, like I just said, we want to be sure that we are secure. So we want to have the MTLS things that the control that service mesh brings. And it helps us with the resiliency that we want to have. And of course, it brings us observability because we can track all the traffic that goes through the service mesh. As you can see on this image, it works with a control plane and a data plane. The data plane is where all the pods live, and the services talk with the proxies, and the proxies talk with the proxies. And this is for the traffic management. So there's a client, an app, and we can make sure that we can split the traffic and make sure that a part of the traffic is going to the old service, a part of the traffic to the new service. And with the observability that we then get, we can make sure that the service, the version 2 service, actually works as we expect it to work. So we can then put more and more traffic to that second endpoint. So with AKS, and that's why we use AKS instead of all the other tools out there, because AKS brings add-ons. And add-ons are provided to us for free, but they are also kept in sync with the version of AKS that we use. So if we use the service mesh add-on, well, let's say we don't use the add-on, right? Then we get the challenges from the field. So we have to make sure that Istio is in sync with the version that we run in Kubernetes. And Istio is strict in its versioning. So we have to make sure that before we upgrade to the latest stable AKS, we also upgrade Istio to the correct version. So it makes it harder to keep in sync with Kubernetes updates. It also is fine-tuning and the configuration part of Istio and its components to work with large-scale clusters. Then we want to use Istio with our own version of Prometheus and Grafana. And so we have to set that up too and manage that as well. And there are issues with, or there can be issues with components and compatibility and underlying cluster and things. And we have to rely on the community to get those solved. And while there's an active community, you might run into issues that have not been solved yet. If we then look at what the add-on brings us, it's tested, it's verified, and we can call Microsoft if things are not working. I think that's the number. It's also a number one, but that's the biggest thing that will help us if everything happens, or if anything happens with Istio on our cluster. Microsoft is handling the scaling and the configuration of the control plane. It's not our problem. They need to scale it. It's verified with an external and an internal ingress setup. It's also verified to work with Azure Monitor, Managed, Prometheus, and Grafana. And once again, official Azure support is provided. So what are we then going to do? This is my legacy application. I have an eShop. And in this eShop, I'm selling stuff. But now I have a team sitting at a desk with a phone, waiting for customers to call. And they call a lot. So why do I not make a chatbot on my shop where people can actually interact with my chatbot instead of with my support team? So what are we going to do? We're going to migrate this eShop into Azure Kubernetes Service. It's an ASP.NET MVC application. I'm by no means a developer, but I know enough of code to be dangerous, right? So I'm going to move this into Kubernetes Service. We're going to host a database into Azure SQL and connect it to. But as I said, I want to make sure that I can keep an eye on how everything is behaving. So I'm going to use the Prometheus service that Azure is offering. And I'm going to use Grafana to actually look at the data that's in Prometheus. I'm going to use Istio inside of the cluster with a public load balancer. And then we use Azure OpenAI, of course. And we have created a new application that's a chatbot with a .NET minimal API with semantic kernel that's connecting to Azure OpenAI. And then there's a Vue.js component that we've put into the old legacy application that's actually interacting with the chatbot. And to make sure that we can put the chatbot on and off when we want to, we have a Azure app configuration field that is helping us to do so. And we know for a fact that when we enable AI on our eShop, we get a lot of traffic and people want to chat with the chatbot and stuff. So we use Kada to do the scaling for us in the cluster. We can use Azure load testing to actually test if that's working. So let's see. Let's do the actual thing and create a demo. Let me see. I'm gonna stop sharing, and I'm gonna present a new screen. Share screen, and I want to share this one. Let me see, where's my mouse? Here. All right. So what you see here is all the containers that are inside of my AKS cluster. And if I now go into the namespace. eShop. You see that we are running, let me zoom in a bit. You see that we are running a web component and a chat API component. The web component is actually serving the website. Yeah, I might not be able to. Let me see. Oh, I see the question. It's K9S. So you write it like this, K9S. That is the command line interface that I am using to show you the cluster components. I'm going to Terraform. This is a bit of live coding, people. It's late at night. Why? It's just output. Yeah. Oh, that's what I mean. And I want to get the increase IP address. And now I have to show a different screen. It's going to work. Yeah, it's working. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share the screen we're now all looking at. So it will be probably a bit weird. Window. Okay. Guys, do you now see my eShop?
Yeah, we can see it. Yeah.
All right, great. Okay. So what you now see is the actual eShop running. As you can see, there's a login interface and there's a chart. So if we put this thing in the basket, we now have one item in the basket and we can continue shopping. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that there's going to be a chat icon interface here. So we're going to go back once again to the editor. I'm sorry for all the switching around, people, but if I share my big screen, you will all see nothing. So switching to this screen again. All right. So what I didn't do yet is build the container for the version 2. And what we're going to do is this is the part that we're going to enable. So I'm going to enable the feature. And what we then going to do is we're going to make sure that we build the new version of the container, version 1.2 or 2.0, if you want to call it like that. And we're going to do that by looking at my README. We're going to take this line. And now I hope that, I think it's here. No, all right. Here. Okay, so we're gonna do a thing. We're gonna do this. All right. Just 16. Next one. We go here. As we want to build. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the ACR build feature. So we let the actual build happen inside of the ACR. To do this, you need a premium ACR, which of course you always have because you want to have the premium features. But this way, I don't need Docker on my laptop or on my system to actually do the Docker build, which I think is kind of handy, especially if you don't have that around. And let me see if we can show you this by, once again, switching screens. It makes sure that the hosts stay awake during the show by switching around all the time. Awesome. So here's my research group. Here's my ACR. And inside of the ACR, you can see the repositories, which are the actual.
Can you zoom in a little bit? And
Oh, of course. Once again, so we are now inside of the research group. We show you the ACR, and here you see the repositories. So that's the actual images that we've built. We have a web image, which is at version 1.0. And we have the chat API version, which is also at version 1.0. And then we have over here, we have tasks. There's no null tasks, but there are tasks running. You see that DD4 is actually running now. And we can inspect the log. So it's compiling WebAssembly stuff. So I think it's almost done. In the meantime, when we wait on that image to build, let me show you. This is the one. Let me show you the app configuration, because this is also a very important part of our setup. So what we have here is we have something called a feature manager. And the feature manager is actually where we want to be able to toggle our feature to be on or off. And we have named this chat. So when we deploy our new container in a minute, you won't see the chat popping up just yet because this is not enabled yet. Let me see if the container is built. Should be ready by now. Yes, so you see here it succeeded. So if we now go into repositories, web, you'll now see that we have a second image ready to go. So out of screen, I'm going to deploy the second app for a moment, the second container for a moment, by upgrading the customization YAML to version 1.1. And if you don't know how this works, look up documentation on customization for Kubernetes resources. Otherwise, I have to switch screens and stuff again. applying. Web is now configured. eShop, it's almost ready for it's almost deploying. So in the meantime, let me refresh. As you can see, we're still online. Nothing is happening, but we're now on version 1.2. But as you can see, nothing changed yet. Everything still looks exactly the same. Now let's go into the app configuration in the feature manager and enable our chat feature. It's now updated. And voila, magic happens. We now have a chat. Do we sell red t-shirts? This first call might take a minute because this is the first time we're actually interacting with the chat API. See if I can stream lost. Hello. What do we sell? So sometimes it's doing this, then it seems that it's not completely understanding what we're asking. I haven't been able to solve this yet. I think it has to do with grounding or with reasoning. I first built this demo when we had old or legacy open API or open. Think about what I once said. Yeah, so it's not understanding, and that might be because if I go to Azure OpenAI and we go to the Foundry portal, yeah, that seems to work. Then deployments. So this was what actually is deployed to do the reasoning, right? So it's using 3.5.turbo and the instruct, and it's using text embedding, but I'm not sure. It should be able to. We sell red. It's probably got it. Yeah, it does not have access to my inventory. Okay. Well, this is not for this evening to solve, but it should return us that yes, we sell red T-shirts, and this is where you can find it. That's what I was hoping it would return. Just unfortunately.
I think, Daniel, like all AI solutions, it's rare that they work straight away. And then when you throw into the mix GPT 3.5 Turbo, which is an older model as well, you've got that kind of challenge of making it behave the way you want it. But I think even showing the integration between the AKS and the Azure OpenAI backend large language models are is the whole concept here, and it's a really, really cool concept as well.
Yeah. So this was kind of what I wanted to demo today. Oh wow, Inception galore. Let me stop screen and switch back to presentation for a second. Where's my presentation window? This one, sure. Because I think I have 2 slides left. Yeah. So as you can see, AI is in everything, everywhere, all at once. We now have Copilot within AKS as well. So helping you debug when a container doesn't work and throws you errors, you can ask Copilot for help with that. And what I've shown you today is the power of AKS. It's the full power of Kubernetes and the open source ecosystem behind it. But it's also fully managed to make it simpler and more productive. And what I didn't show you is the entire ecosystem around this, because I talked about Kida, I talked about the ACR, but there's so much more in this ecosystem that you can use, like Diaper and the integrations with Entra ID. So this makes it, I think, the best cloud Kubernetes that you can get is AKS nowadays. So I think with that, I'm gonna leave it for you tonight. Thank you so much for listening, and let me know if there are any questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Daniel. Again, every time you present, although I kind of try my best to follow on, you then go into that, matrix level ones and zeros, and but the outcome is always really, really good. And again, as I said, like, it's live demos are there to be messed up, right? I always prefer a live demo than a pre-recorded one. So I totally appreciate you coming on and trying that out again. That's awesome.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
No problem. So there's no more questions. Dan asked earlier what the UI was that you're using. That was the K9S. And I don't see any other questions there. So I think if the folks on the audience have nothing else, we'll let Daniel go to bed because it's quite late over there, and we'll move on to our next speaker for the night.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thanks for joining. No worries.
Thanks,
Daniel. Speaker.
Appreciate
Hello,
it.
Tim.
Yep, I'm here. Hey there.
Hello.
Hey, Tim.
Hey, thanks a lot, Daniel. I enjoyed.
Yeah.
I could watch you and listen to you talk shop for hours. It was really nice.
Nice. Thank you so
Amazing.
much.
So, Tim, welcome back.
Yeah, welcome back.
Thank you. Glad to be back.
Always good to hear your presentations and your training. Your voice just rings in my ear when I was learning Azure like many years ago, and when I was learning other Microsoft certifications. I'm like, Tim Warner's voice is just that perfect trainer voice that just explains things so neatly as well. So I always enjoy having you on, Tim.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I feel warm and fuzzy inside. I love hearing stuff like that. And you know what's cool? It happens regularly at a tech conference or something. I'll be like, hey, I'm Tim. And they'll be like, yeah, I already knew who you were when you came in the room by your voice. The voice thing.
Wow.
It's really cool. Yeah.
You got it. Yeah, you got it.
Excellent. So, Tim, you're going to talk about mastering private link with secure and private access to services. So the same question I'll ask of you to Daniel. Do you want us to hold the questions till you do Q&A, or do you want us to flash them up on the screen? What works best for you, Tim?
Daniel's holding them?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, of course, because we're switching. I'll hold it too. Yeah, maybe we can do a back and forth Q&A or whatever.
Yeah, better for your flow.
Fine.
Okay, perfect. That's what we'll do. All right, Tim, over to you.
All right, let me start my timer. I'm going to go for 30 minutes. Can you see, just to verify, can you see the gist on the screen?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Oh, right. I'm glad I asked. Share screen. entire screen. There we go.
Yeah. Seen it.
Okay, good. Outstanding. I wanted to be really lean and mean with the session handout, so I've distilled everything into this public gist, which you can see here. And I want to draw your attention to this short link, go.techtrainertim.com/link, that'll come back to this site. And just to walk you through it, of course, we're going to talk and get into private link, so we'll use this topology reference. But the rest of the file, I constructed a links list thinking in advance of the 80% scenario, the most important questions, including things like the supposed basics, like what's the difference between service endpoint and private endpoint, for example. So I hope that you'll find that just handy. So to get into it, everybody, let's see. To take a look at that topology diagram, I call it my kitchen sink diagram because it puts together a whole bunch of Azure services. There's no indication that this is proven practice. This is a kitchen sink monstrosity. But for our purposes right now, it's going to serve a perfect use case. As y'all, I'm sure, know, that notion of private off-internet access to your data, in particular in Azure, is absolutely enormous. And as we go along here, the reason I'm starting to pause, I'm thinking aloud at the same time. If I say anything that's incorrect, that you know is incorrect, please call me on it. Would you put it in the chat or come off mic or whatever? I willingly stand to ready to be corrected. What I call the V1 approach to access, private access to data services, think of the Azure Storage Service, think of Azure SQL Database, Cosmos DB, Key Vault, that kind of stuff. There's the V1 service endpoint and what I call V2 private endpoint. Want to quickly do the service endpoint because I think it's really instructive and important to understand what's happening under the hood and why. In my demo environment, I have a storage account, and it's one of the several Azure services that support private endpoints natively. In that gist, you'll find a link to the Microsoft Learn page where you'll have the canonical list. It's good to keep that in mind, of course. But another nice thing about the private link service is that in addition to creating private ingress to Azure services directly, you also can use private link to come into AKS, for example. You could build your ingress in all likelihood using App Gateway and using an add-in there, again, similar to the pattern we learned about in the last half hour. Okay, let me see. If my mouse will let me come over here, let me grab my storage account. And what I'm about to teach hopefully is going to be a familiar pattern for all of the other supported data services. There's going to be some kind of networking property or networking setting. And here's, I think, the money. So important. Because Microsoft Azure is a public, commercial, multi-tenant cloud by default, it makes sense, I think, that public inbound access is going to be enabled. So in networking, you have your 4 services, your 8 or more endpoints, depending upon how you're doing replication. That's the default and what we expect. The big money question is, how critical is it for off-internet access, and what do you already have in place? In other words, if you just flip the switch over to disabled, you are definitely taking that resource off the internet as far as inbound access goes. But if you don't have your private ingress sorted, like with some kind of VPN or express route into Azure, you're going to be hosed. You'll also need to create your private endpoint or private endpoints for that service as well. So that's not what we want to do necessarily without a lot of planning. I like to describe this middle option. And again, the different engineering teams on the different Azure services use a little bit different language, but it means the same thing. And what I like about this middle of the road approach, the idea is that it gives us flexibility. If your use case is you only need that private access, say, to Azure storage from within a single subnet on a virtual network, then okay. Because when you enable this, there's a little bit of routing magic that goes on under the hood that I'll show you. It's not magic at all, of course. But it introduces a whole host of problems. Namely, if you are a hybrid cloud already and you already are coming into your Azure VNet infrastructure with a VPN or express route, you would naturally expect then that you should route through your VNet peerings here into the service endpoint, but that's not how it's designed. It's, again, some smoke and mirrors with routing tables. If you're not on this subnet, you're out of luck. The other big problem with service endpoints is security related. And you'll see that, I guess, as we go to the next step, I think. Let's do a service endpoint. So I'll choose enable private public network access will be enabled, but only from selected blah, blah, blah. I'm going to add a link to an existing virtual network that I have in my subscription. And I've got a VM on my workload subnet, so that's where I want this to be. I don't already have a service endpoint deployed, so one will be required. There'll be a few minutes of work as that endpoint gets opened up on that subnet. Now, what is this doing? I keep asking the question and wanting to answer it. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. The other thing that we need to keep in mind with service endpoints is you can work around this private access, like if you are over on a hybrid cloud or if you're coming from another VNet, by using what Microsoft calls the resource firewall. Let me quickly save this. And again, probably a familiar song and dance, but I just want to call it out as a pretty consistent pattern across the core Azure data services that support this out of box. It's not scalable, it's really janky actually. So you see, I mean, I can make an exception for myself. I could add other IPv4, IPv6 ranges. But at the end of the proverbial day, you know what's happening with service endpoints? You're still going over the internet unless you're here. If you're here, you get a back channel. Everybody else, A, you have to be on the resource firewall exception list. B, you're still coming at the resource from the internet, which is not going to make security and compliance teams happy. You know, if you either allow it or you don't. You see what I mean? Let me save one more time because I want to show you what's going on in that target subnet. Let me make sure that I've got it set up okay. So we've got it set up on the workload subnet in my hub VNet, which is right here. And let's look up endpoint. We've got service endpoints and private endpoints. All right, yeah, so good. So far, so good. What was I going to actually show here? I totally forgot. Oh, the routing table. That's right. Yeah, so that's the definition from the VNet side. The real magic, I keep using that term for some reason, is what's going on in that subnet with every network interface besides a private link. We always have to think ahead when we're moving into private endpoints from service endpoints that you're actually dealing with an honest-to-goodness Azure network interface that's going to accept a private IP. I'm doing some spoiler alerts, some things that definitely are enhancements from what we have in this current demo. Let's look up networking in the settings list. And we'll go over to the network interface. I guess we could search for the network interface directly, but and down at the very bottom, come on, mouse, I've got the routing table. I'm trying to get over under help, effective routes. And this is going to be only visible if the virtual machine is running because it's the machine's in-memory routing table. And I want us to pay attention to address prefixes and next hop type. Because we'll see down at the bottom, it's always kind of shocking when I look at this. So this says if you're going for any of these 250 or something subnet IDs, your next hop is going to be on the virtual network service endpoint, which is fine. That's the back channel that you want. But do you see the problem from a security perspective? There's the potential of egress or exfiltration to an unauthorized target because of these service endpoints. So you know as well as I do, the consultant answer of it depends, yes and no, similar idea. Service endpoint can be a wise transition, and it's definitely less disruptive, but you know, keep that stuff in mind. Let's go back to the networking blade here of the storage account and let's unwind the service endpoint. And let's switch it on over to a private endpoint and take a look at the comparison and contrast. All right, so I'm going to first just go back onto the public internet endpoint, just because. I admit to a mild amount of superstition there. And then we'll come over to private endpoints. And before I go flipping any other switches, let's go ahead and create it. Now, if I do a search up here for private link, you might have noticed that for some Azure services that actually have variants or subservices, there's a separate little portal. There's a private link services portal. Private link is the name of the service, and then you've got stuff within it, as you can see. Azure Arc, we'll have to talk about that. The use case of private endpoint combined with Arc-enabled virtual machines. Wow, that's super powerful. I also, before we, just to pause here one more moment, before we go down the creation workflow, I want you to see these approve and reject buttons. Part of the design spec here is it's like a service provider consumer economy where your team, let's say, is responsible for private endpoint into a database that you manage or whatever. Makes sense that if a new connection, a new novel connection that may be authorized is coming in or attempting to come in on that private endpoint, this stops it and gates it. And as you see, it's a basic approval and rejection thing, but it's nice that the engineers thought of that in advance. So let me go to private endpoint. And one thing, again, that wasn't obvious probably when we did service endpoints is that you're basically poking little firewall holes, pinholes, where a service endpoint is to azure.storage, all of those public IPs, as we saw. Here we're being, with private endpoint, really surgical. So it was clear to me that those software engineers and product and program managers wanted to mitigate all of the issues that came out of service endpoint. This is all the world according to Tim, by the way, so call me on me, anything I say. And frankly, in the name of monitoring and visibility, look here. Service endpoints are properties, but they're not Azure resources. Look here. When you do a private endpoint, they're saved and tracked in Azure Resource Graph, and they're subject to Entra authentication and all of that good stuff. That's good news. I'm going to call this Fabric Blob, and you'll see why in a moment. We can name the NIC if we want. Of course, we've got a region dependency between our virtual network, so we need to think about where in the world our VNet is. In this case, we go beyond Microsoft.storage, the resource provider, beyond even storage accounts, to the point where you might think, ooh, because the way I see it, just my opinion, this is a lot. I mean, it's great that we can target a private endpoint right down to a service, but look, I'm using geo-redundant storage, so I feasibly could have quite a few private endpoints to wrangle just on a single storage account. But, you know, that's kind of the idea. That notion of a single virtual NIC can have multiple private endpoints associated with it. And there's, of course, least privilege and least service in reducing our attack surface. Long story short, I'm going into a specific storage account and doing wiring up private inbound to just the blob service. So the containers, or if it's a data lake storage Gen 2 account, the file systems. Again, we've got that region dependency. Here it guessed correctly on both the VNet and the subnet grounds. I want to do a static for sure here. I'm going to call this blob as the host name, and it's 10, 10. I hope this is the correct range. Yeah. Just for now, I'm going to go here. I don't want the demo to break if I can help it. The big thing, speaking of breaking, is handling the name resolution. Let me go back to this topology diagram. Where do I have my private endpoint? Let's look up here in the upper right. Another of the core Azure services that supports this is Azure SQL Database. So we have, well, not the database, it's the virtual server. So this icon is supposed to really represent the virtual server. But I've configured a private endpoint which, as I've mentioned a few times, is a network interface that's going to pick up a private IP from the range on that subnet. But some things that make me so happy is that we can support private off-internet communications from anywhere in your VNet infrastructure, anywhere across your hybrid connections as well. As long as, I don't want to call it an Achilles heel, but it's a fatal flaw in a sense. You have to have the name resolution go through what's called the wire server. What's the wire server and why should you care? I hope you care. It's 168.63.129.16. And here I'm on a VM, one of my Windows Server VMs, and I'm going to do a good old-fashioned IP config all. So we can take a look at some things right out of the gate. So I guessed correctly, 10.10.10 is our subnet ID. But I want you to look. This is really a garden variety out-of-box Windows VM in Azure. Notice that that IP address, it's an Anycast address. So all Azure commercial customers use this for practically everything in your VNets. It does the routing, that does the Azure provided name resolution, it does heartbeat messages, it does Azure load balancer health probes. It does a lot. So it's critical that you understand it. And the fact we can override it. We can do a hard override. We can use Azure DNS. We need to know this if you're going to use private endpoint, because private endpoint really is working with RFC 1918 private IP addresses. And you do need a way to get into Azure from your on-premises environment. You might think, well, that's no problem. We've got an express route that's really fast. It gets worse than that, as we'll see as we go on. But the easy button approach, if you're going through the portal, is to stand up I believe they're free, an Azure DNS private zone. And if you look in the Azure Cloud Adoption Framework and look into their Bicep and JSON deployment templates, there's some gooders in there, including, look in the course files, the exercise files, go.techtrainertim.com/link. I know I included some links in there on landing zone deployment templates where you can just create all of the supported private zones because they're free and they're very useful for this kind of private name resolution. So let me finish out tags. Okay, review. All right, next, finish. Now that creates the private endpoint, but you notice that there's a conscious decoupling in terms of the separation of the private endpoint and the storage account. So we would need, it seems to me, well, probably want to wait until it's deployed, but we're going to need to go back again to that networking tab and sort out what's happening definitively. Yeah, so public network access. I want to be careful here with disabled private endpoint connection. Okay, yeah, so their connection state, it's just the default connection. Unless I'm missing something, that's okay. So I can go disabled. Again, the reason I'm double checking, measure twice, cut once, is because of the extremity there, with the middle option, the middle road, the middle way. You've got internet ingress by default anyway, but you've got a potential back channel. It's nice mid-road for compatibility. Disabled, you've got more architecture to be concerned with, and let me show you why. Let me go to Azure DNS Private Resolver, MS Learn. I want to find a specific diagram from a specific article that works pretty well to teach from. Of course, I need one that's a little bit better than potato quality. Not that there's anything wrong with potatoes, of course. Oh, come on. Let me just go to the page. I'm getting stuck in a loop here. Yeah, nice. Okay. This, if you're wondering, is in the Azure DNS docs. And this is another service. Mentioned quite a few services. I don't know how much of the services I've mentioned over the last 20 minutes or so are relevant to your interests, but they're all related. And I've got links to all their docs in MS Learn in that course file. So let's look here. Hybrid cloud. You've set up a private endpoint for Azure storage. Well, one of the cool things that the Microsoft engineers put into their spec here with private endpoint is that we as customers don't have to change any connection strings. So on premises, you have an app, a script, a process, a person doing a request, not to some other alias, into my storage, blob, core, Windows net. Okay. But other than that, it's different because you'll need to configure conditional DNS forwarding on premises such that if any calls come in for whatever level domain you're creating the rule for, you need to go into Azure. And guess what? Before Private Resolver, this was really painful. There was a few months where you had to stand up your own VM at your own expense to do nothing more, to my knowledge, to do nothing more than to forward DNS to where? The Azure Wire Server. Why? Because Azure Wire Server is the way that Azure needs to do its name resolution. And the private DNS, Azure Private DNS Zone, guess who's allowed to communicate with it? Azure only. Even more particularly, Wire Server. You could complete it by then, can't you? Resolver, the way I look at it, it's one or more virtual machine scale sets entirely managed by Microsoft. You have two endpoints, one to catch inbound, one to foster outbound traffic. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, its main reason for being is to just get you into Wire Server and to do that private IP lookup, such that if on the off chance this private IP address were to change, that change would occur, excuse me, in Azure DNS private zone. And here, the path, let me actually do it. So the script makes a call to the public endpoint for Azure storage. Local DNS says, oh, wait a minute, I've got a conditional forwarding rule. It's going to come into the inbound endpoint. And this is just another resource you create and configure. And it will handle the resolution of the private IP. You might think, well, couldn't you short circuit all this with a hosts file? I think technically, yeah. So why are we going through this? Is this an elegant solution? No, I think it's, well, I mean, it kind of is, but it's more or less a Band-Aid, isn't it? I hope that was useful. The other thing I wanted to show you, if I can scroll back, oh, nuts, in my terminal history, is we can easily test. I'm again logged on to a machine that's in the VNet in Azure, and it's in that subnet that has the private endpoint on it. So a good test is to run NS lookup against that host name and see what it comes back with. So it gives us the, actually nice. It's showing as an alias the public endpoint, but notice that my response is coming back to a private. Let me contrast that in Windows Terminal. If I do the same thing, now this inner terminal is on my hardware, my Windows 11 teaching computer. If I do an NS lookup and just swap in the name of that storage account, TW fabric storage1.blob.core. Okay. Yeah, so it's going over the internet using Wire Server, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I have a question for all of you. I'm happy to answer any and all questions that you all have. We're down to the last 6 minutes according to my timer. But one that I would be interested in hearing from you about is if you think that this is like a leak or an exposure. For some reason, it feels like I shouldn't be able to enumerate the presence of this. I mean, maybe Microsoft thinks that it's assumed that businesses are going to be using private links and it would be expected to have these zones. I don't know. I was just thinking of that. But that's it. I'm not going to be able to upload or do any operations with that storage account. And this was just pinging the DNS. So there's that. Let's come back to the Azure portal and let's look up private link to go to the private link services blade. I'd mentioned that Microsoft has this pattern of using kind of like the Azure Firewall Manager, the Load Balancer Manager. I kind of like it, being a teacher, obviously. And in keeping with that notion of service provider economy, I'm just going to have to punt into the docs. If you have detailed questions about those and in the weeds, I'm going to be pretty worthless. But let's see, what are some other things? I'm just trying to think off the top of my head some novel. You're going to find that the verbiage or the path to set this up, it's going to be a little bit different, but it's going to be the same general idea. You know, you could be setting up and securing Cosmos DB. Same thing. There's public access or inbound internet. There's private, which even if it doesn't use the word private link, that's what it means, that kind of thing. As far as being able to put any of your services in a private endpoint, that's doable as well. So far, we've been doing all with built-in Azure resources. The notion of private link services is, it really seems to, in the portal anyway, it's very opinionated and has you go down towards, well, you'll see. I'll give it a name, TW Private Link 001. It is a regional resource. Yeah, so it kind of corrals you into Azure Load Balancer. Again, it feels a little bit janky to me, and we're starting to get near the perimeter of my experience with the service. It's on my near-term to-do list, actually. Particularly, I'm interested in that ingress path between, a private endpoint, say, in Spoke VM1, coming through into a consumer in another remote subnet, that kind of stuff. Let me think of some other low-hanging fruit that comes to mind with this subject. Yeah, like I said, pending connections, it's kind of cool that there's some basic centralized reporting. I will, if you don't mind, if you would indulge me just for a minute, because I have been with Microsoft as a tech person for a long, long time. I'd like to close by just kind of evangelizing that I think that Private Link Service and Azure Arc are two of maybe 5 or 6 of the most important of all Azure services. And I believe that because they're so universal. The list of built-in Azure services that supports Private Link now is pretty darn vast. Using the link service with various load balancer endpoints, again, I start to get fuzzy there in full disclosure. That's, I presume, remains under active development. And Azure Arc closes the loop in terms of, if you've used Arc-enabled servers, you install an agent or two on your machines, whether they're in data centers or in Amazon or in Azure, it doesn't matter. Well, in Azure, they wouldn't need Azure Arc. But the ability to surface them, and then with Private Link, it seems to me that the notion of managing a remote VM centrally in Azure in Arc is cool because you've got the resource. Private Link, that's even more, making those remote servers part of your VNet infrastructure and therefore able to capitalize on stuff that we don't have the time to get into, sadly, like NSGs, network security groups. Maybe we can talk about that kind of stuff in question time. I think that's it. Let me come back to the gist one more time. Let me repeat it again. go.techtrainertim.com/link, or if you're just searching, azure-private-link-resources.md. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Thanks, Nicholas. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, everybody. Always a joy to be with you.
Yeah, it's really great, Tim. Again, like I do a lot of things. Well, the company I work for, we do a lot of stuff with Private Link, and I know it pretty intimately, but you always just seem to explain it so much better, and it's really cool. And I totally agree with you. I think having Private Link as an option with Azure Arc opens up a whole new load of scenarios, specifically potentially with Azure Local, because you mentioned the NSGs and you mentioned, we've already got policy with Arc, but if you want to extend that networking and extend that on-prem data center, particularly with the whole VMware Broadcom acquisition, that's really ticking people off who are VMware a long time,
sure.
and they're really looking at Azure Local. So I think there's a lot of possibilities in it from a positive perspective. But obviously, if we're talking about the positives, you got to make sure that people understand it enough. So if they're architecting their landing zones, if they're architecting that hybrid connectivity, that it is then extending your public cloud into your private cloud in a way that some people might not understand. So
yeah,
I think that's cool.
And it's
do
salient. It's salient that you mentioned policy as well, because that's right up there, top 5 services.
Yeah.
Why? Because it's universal, literally. And with
Yeah.
ARC, I mean, it's truly multi-cloud, hybrid cloud.
Absolutely. We do have a question, actually, Tim, from Dan. We'll throw it up on the screen. Sorry, Nick. There we go. With Azure Arc Private Link, with Azure Arc plus Private Link, does that mean you could access your on-prem server from Azure without a VPN? Do you want to take that one, Tim, or?
I'll take a stab at it only after having disclosed like I did a minute ago. I don't have a quick answer. Do you? I can speak to the subject, but I don't have a quick yes, no.
Yeah, the answer would be yes if you connect it. That's
Yeah.
the whole concept of it, right? If you've got the VM and it's sitting, like obviously if you've got a VM sitting on a host, a hypervisor on-prem, and you have an Azure tenant, if you don't have a VPN connection or if you don't have an express route connection, you're not going to be able to communicate with it, right? But if you deploy an Azure Arc agent, you can see it up in the Azure tenant, but you cannot connect to it. You can't ping it. You can't communicate with it in the traditional networking context. Whereby if you add a private link to it, I haven't tried this out. I'm just more thinking from the concept of it and from the technical side of it. If you add a private link to the Arc resource, the expectation will be you can at least do some basic networking connectivity. I wouldn't put money on it that it would be a direct replacement for the quality and performance that you get from a VPN or an express route connection, but certainly should give you that extra extension.
Yeah, that's a learning curve thing to me. Dan, thanks for asking that question. Right. It's amazing how fast this stuff moves.
Yeah, it's moving really quick.
Because at first I was thinking, no, that you would need to have that connection. And I'm thinking like in Windows Server 2025, SMB over quick, there's a trend towards VPN-less and the Azure Network Adapter and Windows Admin Center. So my brain is kind of cooking here.
I think the goal is the Azure Local. That's the key really here, right? So if you've got Azure Local, like the big prize for Microsoft and for Azure folks is to try and keep those VMware workloads in the Microsoft ecosystem. And if you can do that by giving them that nice extensibility into Azure for things like policy, for things like security, just through standard Arc. And as you get more comfortable and more familiar and more cognizant of those resources that were once completely segmented on-prem in your cloud, and now you can just plug a private endpoint onto it, that would be awesome. I would love to actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I would love to see, I don't think it would work, or maybe it would, if we had an Azure Lighthouse scenario. So if you have an org that has, let's say, a tenant, and they have, maybe they're a managed service provider, or maybe they're just a big org with multiple different tenants around the world, and they've got Azure Lighthouse connecting into it. I wonder if you had an Azure Arc enabled VM with a private endpoint in tenant B, could you communicate with it? I don't think so. It's probably opening the boundaries too much, but it will. That's a scenario I probably need to try and check out, because it really is then blurring the lines between them, Tim.
Yeah, totally. Fascinating. Unbelievable. Is there another question?
No, I've got a question for myself, Tim. Did you deploy a service endpoint along with this private endpoint, or you just use a private endpoint?
We started the demo doing service endpoint. Then I disabled that and turned on private endpoint.
Why would you use a private endpoint instead of a service endpoint?
Well, in a nutshell, if you're in a hybrid cloud and you're coming into your Azure VNet infrastructure, that's a big deal breaker. I don't want to repeat my whole demo. Is this session recorded?
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay. Yeah. But speaking of networking, what's on the screen now, before I forget, I really want to spit this out. Application security groups, the utility, well, of knowing, number one, because the private endpoint is an Azure managed network interface.
Yeah.
Have any of you been burned? Don't mess around with it. It's like an Azure NIC. You can't You can't bind an NSG to it, but it can be part of an ASG, so you can really
Okay.
further scope traffic. So traffic coming in that meets these rules will go to the ASG, and that's your private endpoint. That seems pretty elegant. What do you all think?
Yeah, again, going back to that kind of VMware scenario. So, company I work for, we've got a lot of VMware customers, very, very deep enterprise VMware experience. And when we're talking, even before the whole Broadcom thing, when we talked to customers previously about, hey, what about Azure Stack HCI, also, well, now known as Azure Local? The question was, or the feedback was, it's not a patch on VMware NSX, because you've got all that virtualized software-defined networking. You can add those application tags, and you could say this NIC, this NIC, this NIC, this NIC. That's our, I don't know, our backend database, or that's our finance app, or whatever. You couldn't do that with Stack HCI like easily. Anyway, it was meant to be programmable with the older version of Stack HCI, but it wasn't really a workable solution. Whereby with the newer versions of OS released with Azure Local, it supports those ASGs a lot more, and I think that's the route that they're going, or they're looking to go to.
Whoa.
Yeah, they're just right in those wheels
Wow.
at the moment with customers, just trying to figure out how we can leverage that networking technology in Azure to bring it back on-prem.
Yeah, how cyclical tech is, how cyclical life is. Related to this subject, it sounds like I'm trying to artificially shoehorn something in, but I swear I'm not. I wanted to ask you all if you're using any of the M365 Copilot stuff specifically.
Yes.
Yeah. I just want, because to tie it to private endpoint, and I'll even, if you don't mind, tie it to Daniel's content with AKS. Getting better. Have you checked it out? I got my Copilot right here. I just want to quickly do a 30-second. The next time, assuming that you do have a license for M365 Copilot, over here, it's so slow and kludgy. It's a very basic interface. There's a marketplace, but it's similar to creating a project in ChatGPT or a custom assistant in ChatGPT. It's really limited. It can only accept up to 4 knowledge sources, but it's at least, I wanted to make sure to show you it. So if you have access to M365 Copilot, you can create a basic chat bot that you would pack with domain-specific knowledge. Again, it's super limited right now, but I can only presume in time, especially when you're working on the private side of M365 Copilot, it'll be much easier to pipeline in and make the bot smart specifically on your private domain data.
I think that's the key as well. I mean, I know the last time you were on, Tim, you did a great session with ChatGPT when the Copilot stuff was only really getting started. And I think, we get customers asking us all the time, hey, why shouldn't I use ChatGPT versus Microsoft Copilot? And there's a bunch of reasons to use one or the other, but I think you hit the nail on the head, Tim. The using, like the bringing your own data, your own domain data, although you can do that in ChatGPT, you're under the same security, role-based access control constructs that your domain data has. So your security accounts, your user accounts, your passwords, they're all related. You don't need to maintain a separate kind of ORBAC model and a separate copy of your data. It just makes it a lot easier. And yes, I know you can connect from ChatGPT, but some orgs prefer to have that warm, fuzzy feeling, to use your phrase from earlier, of having all their data in the same identity platform, so they can then just manage it. So there's a long way to go, I think, with the agent stuff here, but it's looking pretty cool, I have to say. As being in that Microsoft ecosystem, it has stagnated for quite a while. I'm in the IT game since Windows NT, so similar to yourself, Tim. So like, it got to a point where you learn all about a new OS that's released, and then you've got, maybe by the time you feel you're at like ninja level, you've got maybe 1.5, 2 years where no new features come out. Maybe a service pack adds something, and then you can learn a little bit more. And as a trainer, like, that's fairly easy to train for and prep for, right? But then when we have all this stuff in the cloud, and we have all this stuff like we've just talked about, private endpoints. We're now talking about AI. We've talked earlier about Kubernetes with AI. Like there's all of these synergies for these different technologies, and it's keeping us on our toes as consultants and trainers. But I think it's awesome because it's really, really cool seeing it all linked together.
Agreed. And then speaking of trends, we have things like I'm actually got it right here, Microsoft Fabric, which is like the opposite. It's the SaaSification of data analytics. And this, everything is so abstracted away from you in terms of its one lake architecture. You're standing up these data warehouses and lake houses and data models. There's no private endpoint here, which isn't that interesting? Because so speaking of choices and priorities for business to go, there seems like a lot of trust required in Fabric because you're not configuring high availability. You're trusting the vendor. It's all abstracted under the water, you know. So I wanted to point that out again with agentic AI as top line trends that are moving fast. And I've noticed that in Fabric, I'm glad I remembered this. You know, you could be doing your dev work or your data engineer work. And if you've got, again, Copilot access, you know, it's just a question of looking for the icon nowadays. I've got it as an app over here, but I found it's pretty darn good as far as generating DEX functions and creating SQL and Python on the fly. And I would encourage all of you, if you're still feeling some resistance and skepticism towards Gen AI, there's a lot of meat there, you know. There's sizzle, but there is much, much more steak. And let the AI make you smarter, because it will.
Yeah, it's good advice. Great advice.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So I don't see any other new questions that have come in. So that looks like we're good. Nick, have you anything else for Tim?
No. So thanks for joining, Tim. That was an amazing session on Private Link. Before I didn't know what's Private Link before and Private Endpoint, I thought it was the same. But I think Private Link is more about the connectivity for hybrid approach and stuff, bringing everything together.
I like to describe it, link is the umbrella term, and a link has multiple endpoints or services. Thanks for having me, everybody.
No worries.
Thanks, Tim. Chat soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.